Welcome to Garden Grounds. We'll get started in just about 2 minutes. Good morning. So we're going to get started with Garden Grounds. It's my public live Q&A that I basically do. I do it every second and fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. of each month, and it's really an opportunity for anybody who subscribes to my channel. Anybody can watch it, but you need to subscribe to be able to answer or to ask a question. 11 to 12, about an hour of just Q&A. I go over a little bit of a kind of light subject. Today we're going to talk about seed starting indoors. And that's just to give, maybe something for people to think about, ask questions on. But you can really use Garden Grounds for any of your vegetable gardening questions. I'll be glad to answer them. A lot of people do join, so I can't get to all of the questions sometimes. I do my best. If you're interested in this format, you like the Q&A, if you want to join my perk memberships, and you can just go to my YouTube channel, hit the join button. I do this 4 or 5 times a month in a private format, which means there's not that many people. Well, 20 to 40 people. People can ask questions. I can get to all the answers, and it's a really nicely tight-knit group for you to learn about vegetable gardening, and that's perk memberships. So let's get started with today's Garden Grounds, and I'm going to talk about seed starting. I think it's a great way to save money by starting your own seeds indoors. And you can check out my YouTube channel for everything you need to know about growing, indoors. The key is not to spend a lot of money. You don't have to overspend on fancy lights. You don't have to buy, and I sell all this stuff at my seed shop, all the seed starting containers. You can repurpose containers, but you can save a lot of money. Transplants now, if you go to big box stores, are anywhere from like $4 to $6. They're expensive. And we're going to talk a little bit about timing. Let me just show you real quick for those of you that are here now. This is rosemary, and there are about 7 plants that germinated. These were put into the seed starting mix today is this, what is today? Today is the 14th. So these were started on December 6th. So 8 days later, I'm going to have 7 rosemary plants, and they're very expensive to buy. Now, timing wise, you want to start a lot of your perennial herbs early. This is a little bit early because it's for a video. But rosemary, lavender, you want to start indoors a good 12 weeks before you would put them outside. This way they get to a nice size. They get to a nice size indoors for a transplant, but then they also grow to size outdoors so that you can use them as you wish. All right, so questions. And if you're going to ask, if you have a question, please just put it in a format with question in front, because it's hard for me sometimes to pull the question out. So just do question and then ask whatever you want. And I can see there are some perk members on here. And again, that's the paid subscription, and it's, I don't know, it's like $8 or $9 a month. But I do the 5 Q&As. I do some live classrooms for the higher perk. I do a Grow as We Grow series where people can send in video questions, send in tours of their garden, and then I put that series out. Once a month. All right, so I don't see any questions yet. Well, maybe that's a good thing. You guys are set and know everything. But feel free to throw them out there. And let me just check too. Sometimes the chat thread gets messed up, and I got to reset it. One sec. Just fixing the chat here. It's not working. All right, got it fixed. Always a little technical issue sometimes. Julie, I watched your video on making your own starting mix from last year. Have you made any changes for this season? So I do change things every year a little bit. Last year, I think I was doing 3 parts, equal measure of peat moss. And you can go to my YouTube channel and just look up making your own seed starting mix. So it was 3 parts peat moss, 1 part very fine vermiculite. That's a great base mix. I will still use that, but I did change it a little bit with respect to some of the seeds that I'm starting, like the lavender, the rosemary, some other perennial herbs. I want the soil to drain a little bit better and dry a little bit more quickly. So I am adding, another half part of vermiculite for that. Maybe a little perlite. One of the things I try and do is not have you overspend on money. Like, you don't necessarily need perlite for a seed starting mix. So a little tweak there, but generally speaking, you can make your own seed starting mix. 3 parts peat moss, 1 part very fine vermiculite, and that really mimics the Jiffy starting mix that you see. It's a lot less expensive to do it that way, and it works really, really well. And then there's a question from Faye, and oh, I see the question mark. Yeah, you can actually use a question mark that stands out, but just make sure you put in front of your question mark, the words question, something so that I can see it. What do you recommend for putting in raised beds? Oh, let me reread that. Missed it. What do you recommend for putting in raised beds that's different from out in the dirt? Sometimes I don't fully understand a question. The only thing, and this really depends, like, I don't want to be the guy that says use compost. If you're not using compost, you're doing something wrong. Not everybody can make compost. However, if you have the space and you're not composting, I highly recommend it, because it's the cheapest way to amend your beds, and it's the best way to have the strongest plants ever, your own compost. And you just can't get around that. So I would say the only thing you really need to add is organic matter in the form of compost. That really helps. That makes the biggest difference. Continued organic matter, slowly put in year after year after year, builds up your soil. If you're looking for something to add to help the plants grow, again, compost. However, you can get any water-soluble fertilizer. I mean, I will put in the organic granulars. I have plenty of videos on that. I don't want you to feel like you have to get an organic granular, put that in the planting hole. You have to add compost, put that throughout the bed. Then you have to get the water-soluble fertilizer and feed your plants. You can use all of those. But over time, I really feel like adding compost and getting any water-soluble fertilizer is all you need to add to these beds to make them work. And water-soluble fertilizer, you'd put in your transplant, give it a little shot of fish emulsion or something like that, walk away. Maybe once a month you give it a little bit more. But if you have that bed set up, again, I'm going to say it because it's so important, compost, it's going to draw all the nutrients it needs out of there. Now, that being said, maybe you're just starting for the first time and you have heavier clay soil like I do. In that case, it's perfectly fine to turn it. You hear a lot about no dig and stuff like that. You want to get to that point. But when you're first starting a garden, you may have to turn the soil because it's really compact. In that, I would add, if I can't get compost, peat moss. You could get cocoa coir if you want. You're adding in that kind of very fine organic matter to help loosen up the clay soil. You can look for bagged compost products. You just have to know what you're buying. You can look to get them from landscape companies, add a little bit to get that new bed sort of up to speed. But once established, your beds are good. It's just really a matter of adding organic matter. And that also includes leaves and grass cuttings throughout the summer, end of fall, etc. Just build up that base. I spent a lot of time on that question, but for new gardeners, it's not a matter of buying all these expensive, fancy labeled packages of fertilizer and stuff and, all this, fungi and whatever to put into the soil. All of that arrives just by using compost. All right, we killed that question pretty well. If you have more questions on it, please ask. Question about light. So when above is when it says watts, like 20 watts, 30 watts, 15 watts. How does that affect? So watts, I don't use that. Watts is not a good example of anything for the plant. And it depends on the bulb. You're looking for two values. And most of the time now you can buy the white LED shop lights. They work. I've been using them forever. Grow plenty of good transplants. The plants that you see here are being grown under white LED shop lights. So you're looking for two values. You want lumens, L-U-M-E-N-S. That's the intensity of light. And it really doesn't matter. Like, there's less wattage is used for LED bulbs. So wattage doesn't really help you. So you want 5,000 lumens, that's brightness, or higher. And you want the Kelvin value to be 5,100, 5,000 or higher. 5,000 Kelvin to 6,100 Kelvin is like daylight. So you're looking for a lumens value, 5,000 or more, and a Kelvin value of, if you can get it in the 6,000s, but 5,000 or higher. And that's what you want to grow with. For seedlings, what plants do not need to be directly under a light? Space is a premium, lights are costly. Not really, Sheila. So I'll answer it in two ways. When you have this, when you're just waiting for your plants to germinate, all plants need intense light. If not, they're going to break the surface here and they're going to put all their energy into growing this long stem. They're going to get tall, leggy, fall over. They're going to be really weak. So you want, this is about 6 inches away from the lens. Like, you want the lights to sit like close, like that, for germination. So the white LED lights should sit above your seed starting mix by anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 inches, depending on the intensity. But at the 5,000 lumen level, let me pull the chat back up. You want them to be about 2 or 3 inches above the seeds. Once they germinate, they have to get hit by intense light. Leave those lights on 12 to 14 hours for 7 days. They establish, they don't get tall and leggy. They're ready to go to the next phase. At that point, some plants you could move to the periphery of the lights and they'll be okay. But you really need direct light from your lights for the first, generally speaking, 3 or 4 weeks of your plant of growth. But that first week from germination, when they break the surface, till they're growing for about 5 to 7 days, they have to have that intense light or they're just going to get leggy. After that, you can kind of shuffle things around a little bit. Question: I live in Tennessee and all my garlic leaves are turning yellow. Should I add fertilizer? No. That's a good question. Last year I covered them with hoops and watered regularly. This year I'm hands off. So I know my son's in Nashville and I've built him gardens in Nashville. They're very similar to Maryland, temperature-wise. When you put your garlic in now for the fall, Tennessee, most areas, Maryland, wherever, it's going to just set out roots, it's going to establish, and it's going to send up the greenery for, and depending when you put it in, October, November, December, even January, that green growth is going to get beat up. It's going to turn yellow when the freeze comes and the frost comes. The cold temperatures really don't lend itself to growing nice green growth, but that garlic is establishing. It's getting nice roots. So to answer your question, hands off is a fine approach. You just want to make sure the soil is moist, and it should be. It doesn't really dry out that much unless we get a freak, heat wave in December or something like that. Just to make sure there's some moisture there, but let it go. That greenery will get beat up. It may brown, it may yellow, it may go away, but soon as everything warms up in the spring, all this new green growth is going to go. And that's when you want to hit it with a water-soluble fertilizer, give it some nitrogen, let it get going, and you're going to be okay. You don't have to do a whole lot for garlic, really from, let's just say, October to end of February, depending on where you are. It's when spring comes again, feed it and it'll take off. All right, just catching up where I left off here. Helen, I live in, oh, garlic, we got that one. Elizabeth's joining a question with Darlene. Watts, I mean, I could be wrong, but Watts isn't going to tell you a whole lot. The LEDs are great because the electricity or the wattage used to power them is so much lower and you save money. But low wattage with an LED really lends itself, or LEDs really send out bright, intense light, and it's not really, it doesn't really correspond with the wattage. Not enough to make a difference. Barb, I noticed last Saturday, temperature 62 here in zone 6A. My apple tree was getting buds. Will it damage? So, excuse me, maybe, probably not. If you have bigger budding and full budding and it's like spring and it's supposed to be warm and everything is going, and then they're close to maybe opening or something like that, and a frost comes and kills them off, that's a problem. But right now, they're going to be able to figure it out. So, you know, those buds probably get killed off. I'm not sure what your weather does. But there's enough time for them just to send out new buds in the spring and everything should be fine. So if it happens now, it's usually okay. But if it happens in spring when everything is growing and it's getting ready, frost comes, damages the buds, the tree doesn't usually recover for that year from that. That one girl, I'm in zone 6B. I planted some carrots a little too late. They're pretty tiny. Is there hope? Yeah, so carrots are really frost hardy and can take ground that freezes. So it's very possible, and I've done this with carrots before, is in Maryland, we're in zone 7A now, or maybe, I don't know, it's always changing, but zone 7. They can survive the winter and then they take off in the spring. And it's very possible that your plants are going to do that. Probably won't develop a whole lot, you know, this extended fall, early winter or something like that. But they can survive. You could, I mean, you could cover them. I mean, it's possible if you put like a low tunnel over it and you're getting enough warmth that they actually develop and you can harvest early winter or something like that. I just don't know your garden or your immediate growing space well enough. But carrots can be left unless you get a super deep freeze that lasts a long time, lots of depth of frozen soil. The carrots survive. So Darlene, yeah, the watts value I just can't help you with. You have to, even if it's a different light and it's not a shop light, all lights that are LEDs for growing or even lighting a house often have lumens and Kelvin value, because that's the brightness. It tells you, you know, how bright it's going to be in the room that you're using. And the Kelvin value can be daylight. Like softer lights are more yellow tone. The higher Kelvin value more mimics daylight. So you have, if you can't find the lumens value and you can't find the Kelvin value on that light, if you can return it, I would recommend that if it's being used solely for growing, and try and find a different light. The Rooted Heart Garden. I have lots of worm castings from my worm farm. Is it a waste to put them in the beds now, or will it help the soil for the spring? It's not a waste. A lot of people sometimes worry that your compost and worm castings outside can get leached away, and it's possible if you get crazy torrential rains, some of it's going to go, but stuff is still breaking down. I mean, you could put it into the garden now. It's not going to necessarily do anything special, but it will be there for when your plants come. And if you have organic matter in those castings that haven't broken down, it's going to take care of some of the soil biology and help it out. But I wouldn't say that there's any prime reason to put it out now versus the spring. If you can kind of just save it, worm castings can be a premium because you don't have a lot. I would just wait till you're planting your plant in the spring, mix them into the planting hole of your transplant, your tomatoes, your peppers, your squash, and use it that way. I like castings more for directly putting it into the planting hole of transplants. So, can I explain how to water greens and fruit trees which are outside in the winter? So, watering is the hardest thing. I can't tell you how to do it because every garden is going to be different with soil, rain, sunlight, drying soil. However, fruit trees, if they're established, they don't really need to be watered during the winter. If you just put in a fruit tree like in the fall and you're getting it established, you want to water it once a week at least because it only has that little root ball. It doesn't have roots extended throughout the soil. So a freshly planted tree, you want to water right where that root ball is and make sure it stays moist, really till the temperatures drop, and it's dormant anyway, so it's not pulling a lot of water out of the ground. But in the beginning, once a week, every 10 days or so, once it's dormant, you can kind of let it go. If you notice you don't get rain for 2 weeks or something like that, give it some water. But established trees, you don't have to do anything with. For the greens, you're kind of looking at the soil. If the top of your garden soil is a light brown and it's dry, just move it out of the way. If it's dark underneath, there's moisture in there, move it a little bit more. You're going to see whether or not there's moisture in there. Again, new seeds, transplants for greens, you got to water them more often. But once they have the roots established, once a week is probably fine. You just don't need a lot. Shirley, my Florida garlic is 8 inches tall. Yeah, you should just leave it alone. Garlic can be difficult to grow where you don't have a winter, like hardneck. I have videos on this if you want to look up hardneck garlic, softneck garlic, planting garlic. So hardneck garlic needs a cold period to really establish a nice root system and develop a nice big bulb. Excuse me. In Florida, you can probably grow softneck garlic anytime because it stays warm, and you just get softneck garlic, you press it in an inch or two deep, and you just let it grow. So you're growing a little bit differently because you're not getting that cold winter period. So I would just water it. You need to water it more because you're in Florida. If the bed's already been prepped with fertilizers, there's not much you need to do, but you're really watching your garlic now grow. Excuse me, I got this lingering cough that is getting better, but it's been like around forever. It's driving me nuts. Your garlic in Florida is probably going to be growing to size. You're not going to get the dieback like I was talking about earlier. Rose, I cannot grow lettuce all year round. I can grow lettuce, get it in the ground in like September. I can harvest it early December, but then December, January, early February, it's just too cold. Some of the lettuce gets beat up. If I cover it or I put it in a cold frame, I can, but I can't do it outside. How do farmers grow these huge tomatoes? What's the secret? I tried everything and mine don't get. Faye, so, that's a big question. You have to grow the right variety. So you want to grow varieties. If you're talking about tomatoes get to be a pound or so, you have to grow those varieties. And if you're, I guess you're subscribed because you're able to answer a question. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really based on a variety. Once you have the variety that's going to produce large tomatoes, it's a matter of, prepping the soil. I have plenty of videos on that. Getting the transplants into the ground, When the ground is warm and the top couple inches is like 60, 70 degrees, you get a great root system, and you're just feeding and you're taking care of your tomato plant. I can't really tell you exactly how to do that because there's a lot to it. But it's regular watering. Water more often than you might think. That's the biggest thing people do wrong, is they underwater their garden. And based on the variety, you should get those large tomatoes. So I would spend maybe your December, January, if you're growing from seed, to look up different varieties and order them. I sell a lot at my seed shop, therustedgarden.com. I have tomatoes that are specifically 1 pound varieties and stuff like that. Or if you're buying transplants at the store, when you go there, you're going to want to look up on your phone the size of the tomatoes, because sometimes it's hard to tell from the tag. This way you're growing the ones that are going to get really big. All right. So Gary, just make sure you throw out a question, but I saw this one. Can the soil be an issue for carrot growth? Could it be too thick? It can be too heavy, too much clay, not loose enough. And it does impact the growth of the carrot, because a carrot sends down a long taproot. So nice, loose, fluffy soil, if you're growing 8, 10, 12-inch carrots, you want that taproot to go straight down, and then up that root, you get this nice straight carrot. If it's heavy, that root can kind of twist and turn, and you get distorted carrots, smaller carrots. So it does make a difference. Julie, better explanation than mine. Let me just read that. Watts is the measure of energy used to bring out the light, not the brightness. That's why LEDs are more efficient. So LEDs are much lower wattage, but much brighter light, versus like the incandescent lights can be 60, 80 watts, and it's still not better than a 7-watt LED. So even though it has a greater wattage, the LED at 7 watts is much better for growing plants. What is 1 inch of water equal to in liters? So an inch is 2.5 centimeters, I believe. So inches don't equate to liters. Gallons equate to liters. So I'm not sure about your question. But I know 1 inch of water is equal to 2.5 centimeters of water, if that helps. So let me just go back to this. So this is the rosemary, and timing really makes a difference. So here's a couple of plants that I start a good 12 weeks early. Typically I would start these in January, and I'll be doing, a whole growing series, as I always do, for January and February. Rosemary, lavender, sage, chives, oregano, thyme are perennial herbs, and I like starting them 10 to 12 weeks early so that they get up to size and I can get them out into the garden and get them growing. So when you're growing indoors, it's really important to know the length of time you want that plant growing inside. That helps set up the plan. So like these perennial herbs will go under my lights in January. They'll get to size. They'll need less light being close to them. They're going to get moved out. You can't really see it, but I have some shelves over here to my right. When they're bigger, they don't need that intense light from your grow light system. So they're going to get moved out from there, put by a window. They're big enough to handle less sun, less light coming from the sun through that southern window. Once they're cleared out, then I'm going into my cool weather crops. They'll stay under those lights 4 to 6 weeks, then they'll get moved outside. As they're ending, I'm putting in my tomato plants, some of the warm weather crops that I'm only going to keep under there 4 weeks. That's just the general overview, and I'll be explaining that on my YouTube channel. Is just the timing and amount of time you want those transplants growing. Peppers, for example, tomatoes, now I want to get outside in 4 to 6 weeks, either in the ground or bigger containers. Peppers I want to grow indoors for about 10 weeks. So the timing really makes a difference. So you don't want to mix in a flat, some cool weather crops, your tomato seeds, your perennial herbs, and things that need different amounts of time under your light. So you do have to learn that a little bit. And I'll be talking about that. And if you have questions with respect to that, sign on every Thursday at 11 and I can help you with your whatever's going on. So in January, if you're growing stuff indoors, you have questions about seed starting, certainly throw them out there. All right, I got to figure out where I left off here. Helen, what is the proper depth for planting onions and how often should they be fertilized? So I'm assuming you're talking, well, I'll answer it this way. So you have onion seeds. Onion seeds only have to go down maybe 1/4 inch. I actually don't like doing direct seeding for onions, like putting seeds into the ground outside. I like to grow transplants. So in a little foil tray, I have videos on this. Look up, starting onions indoors. I just sprinkle in a little tin foil tray with about 2 to 4 inches of soil, starting mix, all my seeds. I let them grow maybe 6 to 8 weeks indoors. Then I take them out, I break them apart. They have great root systems, and then I put them into the ground. And I put them to a depth so that it's just a little bit over the bulbing white part of the onion. Now, it's hard to explain in this format, but I have lots of planting videos on onions. When you put your transplants out, you really do want to water them. If when it's cool when the temperatures are cool, look at your soil. If it's a dark color and it's saturated, you don't really have to do a whole lot to it. But if the sun is beating down and warming up that top inch, your root system is only in that top inch. So you might have to water the transplants 2 to 3 times a week for that first week, maybe 2 times the second week. But once they get established, then you can go with 1 or 2 weeks, just depending on the amount of rain. You can't overwater onions, so if you're in doubt, water them a little bit extra. But look at your soil after you water. When the top of the soil is dark, it's saturated. And if it looks like a light color, just move it away. And if you move away 1/2 inch and it's still moist and dark brown, you probably don't have to water. It's the question I get all the time is how often to water, and it really can't be answered. I mean, the answer is as often as your plants need it, but that sounds a little bit too, cheeky. That one girl, do you have any tips for preparing the soil of an area in the ground that has never been planted before? No specific tips, but the first thing I do is kind of observe, and if it had green grass and weeds and stuff growing, you got soil you got a growing space that's got nutrients. I like to, and I do this a couple of ways. Like I might cut down, if it's, let's say it's grass, I cut it down really short. I put cardboard over it. I put my compost or some soil on there, and I do a no dig style. I'm able to do that because I have ample compost and I have other soil that I can put on there. And that works, A lot of beds in my main garden, I didn't do it that way because I wanted to get them up to speed quicker. When you do the cardboard trick, sometimes you got to wait a couple of weeks for the cardboard to start to decay and all that. So I get a shovel, I dig it down, I remove what's on top, don't want that. Turn it over, I throw in some peat moss, typically, break up the clumps of dirt, kind of get it set up like that. A couple handfuls of organic granular fertilizer, work it into the top, water it in well, and that's how I get started when I don't have compost. That's how I did most of my beds. Over time, I add stuff to that soil, and then eventually I stop turning it. And it's fine to turn your soil lightly, once or twice a year, every couple of years. But if you can get to a no-dig style, that's just better in the long run. But you're allowed to turn the soil. You don't want to get like a tiller and pulverize that soil into oblivion. But just putting in a shovel, flipping it over works. The other thing you can do if you don't want to turn it over, you can get a broad fork that has like these really thick tines, and you just push them in 12 inches into the bed and you rock back, and it lifts up everything, lets air into there, and then you could put some of your better soil maybe on top, plant that way. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I wouldn't overspend bringing in all this bagged product It doesn't really matter. If your soil has life growing on it, loosen it up, fluff it up, add in some compost if you have it, maybe mix in a nice bag of soil if you're worried about seed starting and having a nice space up top for the seeds to be dropped in, but build it up slowly over time. I do grow sweet potatoes. What's the ideal depth for lettuce in soil, Gary? I was going to use some grow bags above the soil to keep the pests under control. So I'm going to answer it a couple of ways. The ideal depth for lettuce in soil, if you're dropping a seed, is almost on the surface, lightly covered, and it will do its thing. If you're talking about the depth of the actual soil, you know, it's always good to have 12 inches so that the root systems get way down there. You have to water less. But you can grow lettuce. You're going to have to keep up the feeding and the watering more in as little as 4 inches of soil. And that's enough to establish a root system for it to get what it needs. But I mean, that's how I would kind of look at it. I have a lot of flower boxes and places that I grow radishes and lettuce in 4 inches of soil, but they dry out quickly. They have to be fertilized more with water-soluble fertilizer. But just a 5-gallon bucket with like a 10, 12-inch depth is plenty for growing lettuce. We'll get to more questions in a second. We got a good, you know, usually sometimes I stay on for an hour, but the garden grounds I try and at least make it to 45 minutes. And again, if you like this format, I'm doing this every second and fourth Thursday, 11 a.m. public. And if you're interested in the perk memberships, go to my channel, hit the join button, and I do this 4 or 5. I think December I'm doing 6 of these mentoring classes. And they're at different times, so they hopefully fit into more people's schedule. The sweet potato slips. So I do have a couple videos on that. I used to start them in water, and that didn't work as well as putting them on their side in a shoebox, a plastic shoebox, with maybe 3 inches of starting mix and just keeping it moist. So it's possible that you start a sweet potato and it just takes off and grows crazy, and it grows all the slips really fast. But generally speaking, your sweet potatoes want to go out into warm soil. So for Maryland, it's like middle of May. And it takes about 4 weeks, in my opinion, 2 to 4 weeks, but a good 4 weeks for the slips that once you break them off the sweet potato to grow a nice big root system. And then for them to actually grow, I'm going backwards, to actually grow on the sweet potato and get to that 4 to 6 inches where you break it off and then put the slip into the water. That can take anywhere from 4 weeks if you're lucky, but realistically 6 to 8 weeks. So what does that mean? February, March, April is 12 weeks, and then I got 2 weeks into May. I like starting my sweet potatoes February, giving them at least 12 weeks to 14 weeks before they would be completely ready to go into the ground. And that means you have to put the sweet potato in the starting mix, let the green growth grow, break that off, put them into water, get a really big root system, and then put them outside. So I would count backwards from the day that you want to put them into your garden, and it should be warm. They love the heat. They need the heat. Putting them out early here in Maryland in like in April doesn't do anything. So count backwards 12 to 14 weeks from when you want them to get into the garden, and that's when I would start the sweet potatoes indoors. I would also do 2 varieties, because there's one variety, and I don't know the name of it. Like, I've bought them at organic stores. They take forever to do their thing. But then there's a Japanese variety that's purple, skinned, that grows slips really fast. So mix up the varieties a little bit too, so that you're not accidentally picking one that takes forever to grow. My onions, that one girl, have small bulbs no matter what variety. What's the key to getting nice big onions? So, onions all bulb based on the hours of sunlight that they're getting. So, depending where you are, you have to look up onion zones, not garden zones, but onion zones, and it'll tell you to grow short day, long day, or intermediate day onions. Maryland is right in the middle, so I grow intermediate day onions. What I found matters is the variety. So I don't know which varieties you tried, but you want to make sure you're matching the onion to your growing zone for onions. After that, again, you want a loose soil, good amounts of organic matter, slow and steady feeding from compost if you can. But you want to keep them, pretty well watered, and you want to keep them fed initially with a water soluble in the beginning, maybe mid-growth, but it's not really based on how much fertilizer you're putting in there. Onions are going to bulb based on the variety and the amount of daylight that you're getting. Like short day onions, I forget, maybe they're like 8 to 10 hours. Intermediate onions are like 10 to 12. Long day onions need 14 to 16 hours of sunlight per day. I also found too that I like growing onion transplants. I put the seeds in a container like I was saying, grow them for 6 or 8 weeks, put the transplants in. Onions are biennials. So I like getting, my seed grown transplants out there because they think they're the first year and they're trying to grow this big bulb. If you're buying the small onion sets, just a little round onion that's dry, and you're planting them, sometimes they don't bulb up nicely because one, it can be the wrong variety. But even though they're small, they think they're their second year and they spend more time growing the leafy greens and trying to flower than really bulb up to a nice onion. So again, I saw the question, but make sure you put question in front so I don't miss it. Ground prepper. What do I add to blueberries before winter? So blueberries are pretty hardy. They put in deep roots and they pull everything out. At this time, I will scatter some organic granular all around the base of the plants. Nothing specific. Any cheap, basic organic granular is fine. If you have lots of compost, putting compost around the top, on the top of the soil around the base of the plant is excellent. Blueberries like more acidity. A more acidic soil helps them pull in nutrients better. If your plants aren't really suffering from that, you would sort of know. You could skip this step, but I like to lightly give them a water-soluble fertilizer that's more acidic. I do that once real quick, just soak around the base. In fall, winter, I do it again in the spring. Brings in some acidity, helps the plant. They're also getting nutrients, and that's all I really do for my my blueberries. They don't need a tremendous amount of care. Come growing time in the spring, give them a great big watering. Let them kind of get a nice depth so that the water's sinking down deep. And they're going to be good to go. They're going to know what to do and hopefully get a great harvest. Ugh, I coughed. We're going to go back to sound is out. Usually I do pretty good about turning the sound back on, so we'll be back there. Let me go back and let's see. Did you hear me talk about strawberries in containers? Just give me a yes or a no. Yeah, smooth on my part. I'll just pick up. I'll stay on now till 1 o'clock then. All right, well, let's go back to strawberries. Strawberry plants the question is, can you talk more about overwintering strawberries in containers? So I'm in Maryland. I keep my containers and my strawberries stay in little containers, flower boxes, vertical towers in the ground. January, February, I get freezing temperatures. The ground is frozen to at least 2 inches deep. Strawberries always come back, maybe a little bit of die-off. But a strawberry plant can survive down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, even a little bit lower, as long as the temperatures come back up. So you don't really have to move them indoors. And then I'm not sure if you're saying your garage is 40 degrees or your house is 40 degrees, which is cold. If you bring plants indoors, it's usually warmer. They try and grow. It does mess up a little bit their cycle of not having that cold period. But more importantly, when you bring in soil from outdoors, a warm house just lets all these insects hatch. You get problems. You can get fungus gnats. They spread to your other plants. It can just be a mess. So I don't recommend it. All right. Good companion plants with blackberries. Blackberries grow these nice tall canes. There's nothing specific that helps a blackberry plant. Some people plant companion plants to help protect against pests, to help create a better soil. And sometimes they just like to have companions on plants that can grow next to each other so they can increase their harvest. So nothing specific for blackberries, but you know, at the base, you could do strawberries. You could put in small bush crops, maybe even some low blueberries. As long as the blackberry canes aren't shading out the space, you could put pepper plants down low because the canes just get so tall and they go straight up. There's not a ton of foliage. So you could grow like peppers, for instance, as an example, at the base. All right. Did we cover? If I missed the question, go back to honeydew. I didn't answer the honeydew question last time. Bruce, did you hear my answer on the calendar of times? You're going to have to put the honeydew question back out again because I don't see that one. And then we'll go to fertilizing potatoes. I fertilize my potatoes. I have a whole video on it. It's best to watch that. I fertilize the soil heavily at the beginning when I'm putting in my seed potatoes, and then I kind of just let them go. But I use a lot of organic granular, some products to increase the phosphorus and potassium. They are heavy feeders, especially in containers, and I just add that at the beginning, put in my seed potatoes. I will water them in sometimes with an organic granular, but just soak in the area and then I kind of let them go. And then for next question, what other plants can benefit from my acidic fertilizer besides blueberries? Not hydrangeas only, Stacy. I don't know of any other vegetables that want a little more acidic soil. Blueberries specifically, but nothing aside really from blueberries and hydrangeas. All right, I'm waiting for the chat to catch up. Any other last questions? And let's just do a double check. I think the sound didn't work because I clicked it off and didn't click it back on. But sometimes there's other errors, so just let me know if you can hear me now. All right, so I'm going to stay on a little bit past 12 because of the sound issue. All right, what else? Ashley, how far in advance should I start potato slips in soil? So sweet potato slips, if that's what you're talking about, I like, well, let me just be clear. Sweet potato slips are for sweet potatoes, which are not potatoes. I'd like to start those about 12 to 14 weeks before they would go into the ground. So that's when I would start them indoors. Potatoes, you don't need slips. If you're just growing potatoes, you're just actually putting a whole potato or a cut piece of potato into the ground, and that's a different process. And sometimes the process for a potato is called chitting, C-H-I-T-T-I-N-G, where you let your potato sit in a warm place and it grows all these eyes. So just to be clear, so for regular potatoes, the chitting process you would start, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks before you want them to go outside. You also don't have to do that. Most potatoes will grow anyway. You're just kind of speeding up the process a little bit. You can plant potatoes. Potatoes are interesting because the potato in the ground, you're putting a potato 4 to 6 inches into the earth, generally speaking. That's usually protected from a freeze. But if that green growth comes up, and it comes up pretty fast, if a frost comes and hits that green growth, the green growth is killed off and it dies back. So the green growth above the soil is not frost tolerant. So you sort of have to time it so that when you put the potatoes in, you know, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks maybe for that green growth to get going. You want frost to be gone. So you're timing it so that the greenery is growing into a frost-free time in your garden. Cheers to Texas. My last frost usually shows up sometime in May, early May. Wanda, raised beds in Kansas. I have a large amount of pill bugs. They have begun to eat carrots, beets, and at night come out on the tomatoes. How do I control these devils? So pill bugs are pretty tough. They're probably hiding somewhere. So the first thing you want to do in your garden is make sure you don't have like boards or tarps or things laying around they can survive and live under. Get rid of that. This isn't the answer people like to hear the most, but usually a chemical dust like Sevin, or you could try an organic dust like spinosad, and you're really having to have the bugs eat something and die off. It's very difficult. Pill bugs could be controlled with neem oil, because when they ingest the azadirachtin in neem oil, it kills them off over a couple of days. It shuts down their stomach, basically. I've not used anything specifically for pill bugs because I don't really get them here in Maryland, but you are looking for a organic solution, if you can, of a spray or a dust that they're going to ingest, and it's going to kill them off. Potting up your seedlings and timing. We'll actually be doing a class on that, and I can answer it more in the perk memberships. Again, this is a public Q&A. I do this every Tuesday and every second Thursday and fourth Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. The perk membership, I do 5 of these. It's a paid membership through YouTube. Just hit the join button. We'll be talking more about potting up. It's going to vary. based on how you're growing. Like I have, let me switch over. I saw these at my seed shop too. These are the smaller starting cells. So if I'm growing tomatoes in here, I have to pot up usually from this. If I'm growing tomatoes in here, this is a bigger container. They could possibly stay in this depending on how long I'm growing the tomato plant. I don't need to pot up. And I like growing more in these larger containers now because I don't have to pot up at all. I can grow my pepper plants right in here. They can stay in here. I don't have to pot up. Same with my tomato plants. So to answer your question, it depends on the size of the container and it depends on how long it's been growing in there. So it's hard to eat. It's hard to say what the timing is for potting up because it varies too much. The hose that I use is HoseLink. I think if you go to any of my videos, there's an opportunity to maybe save a little bit of money. They don't give a big discount, but the link for HoseLink is sometimes in my videos. But if not, you know, HoseLink is a great retractable hose if that's what you're talking about. Question. I made my seed starting mix. Can I put it in an airtight container? I would let it breathe. If you put it in an airtight container, it might get moldy. Don't worry about the mold it forms. But I just kind of, you know, I make my seed starting mix. I have videos on using boiling water, sterilize it. I just kind of let it dry. Or a loose lid. I have it, what do you call it? A tote. And the lid just kind of sits on there. Air can still circulate. That's fine too. I just don't feel like you need an airtight lid. You don't need a bog to grow cranberries, but you need really wet soil. So yes. Or you have to figure out how to do that. The bog itself just makes picking easier because they float. I have not grown hemp. I was lazy and now some dead plants in my greenhouse have mold. Do I dare add them to compost? Yeah, I think you can. You know, you can actually, I mean, you can add diseased plants to compost. And if it really truly composts down, those diseases are gone. If you throw in a diseased plant and the plant is not composted down, there's a chance the disease spreads. However, what you're describing is just normal mold and fungus that isn't a problem. It's just taking care of a dead plant. So those molds and fungi are already in your compost pile. I haven't done cuttings for blackberries yet. The best time is usually new growth green wood, so that's usually the spring for like blueberries and blackberries. And it does take some skill to kind of get it going. I propagate most of my blackberries by digging up new growth and just potting it up. You can take canes of raspberries, definitely, goji berries for sure, sometimes blackberries and fig trees too. You can let them into the ground, put a brick on them, and often they root out. But blackberries is more of a challenge for that. All right, turned it back on. Helen, could you do a series on starting perennial flowers and share which need fertilizers and which don't? Or share a site that tells us? So I don't think there's a place that's going to tell you everything needs fertilizers. Not every plant needs a lot of fertilizer, and not every plant has to be fertilized. But they're getting it out of the soil from mulch that's decaying, from compost that's in there. So early on, you're generally giving them a nice starting base with some fertilizers, maybe water them in, and then you can let your perennial flowers go. because they grow deeper roots and such, you don't have to fertilize them a whole lot. But I don't know of a channel, and I don't have any videos that tell you exactly how much to do that. I mean, a general rule of thumb is you can just lightly scatter some organic granular around your flower beds, lightly, once in the spring, and just let it be, you know, and you got plenty of nutrients. I have videos on starting perennial flowers indoors, and timing for when you would start them indoors so that they get to a size and you can put them outdoors. And you can just look up perennial flowers on my channel. But I don't have anything specific with respect to fertilizers. But definitely, if you want to start perennials from seeds this month, you can find a lot on my channel already. Just check perennial flowers. And I think the video is pretty detailed with the timing for when you want to start them. And I'll be hitting on them again, you know, this January. But if you want to get started now, check out the videos. You can grow indeterminate tomatoes up a chain link fence. You can weave them through the chain link fence. You can let them go crazy and just weave them through, and you can do whatever you want. On the other side of the chain link fence, if you have deer, they are going to sometimes come and chew them to the fence part, but the stuff inside the fence should be perfectly fine. I generally thin my seedlings when the true leaves appear. If you're growing tomatoes, I always say put in 2 seeds. When you get the first set of true leaves, just remove the weakest plant. You don't want to just put 1 seed in and then be waiting for something that's not going to germinate. So it's always a good idea to plant 2 or more seeds of something and then thin them down. In this example, the sun's coming in, but I'm not going to thin these out. Like, I'm going to let the rosemary get to a good inch or so, and then I will break up the root ball, and these are all going to become transplants. So depending on what I'm growing, I'm not always thinning them down to the plant, to the strongest plant, and getting rid of the other plant. All right, we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes if you want to throw out your last questions. Oh, you have grow bags and the cats come and use them as a litter box. I don't know what really repels cats. I'm assuming you have plants growing now. What you can do is get chicken wire, and you can cut it into the shape of your containers, make a dome, put it over that container, let your plants grow through that. Chicken wire can come in small holes, it can come in bigger holes. You can buy fencing that has bigger holes, so if you have thicker plants. But you can kind of make a dome out of chicken wire or fencing that just is not, you know, suitable for the cat. It's not going to like to walk on it, it's not going to be able to sit, it's not going to be able to get in there, and you're just growing your plants through the chicken wire. Well, one and only. Yep, exactly. That's what I was just saying about the cats. Good thought. So, William, what are my top 5 choices for chop and drop plants for organic fertilizer? I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because I have enough space that I chop everything and I make my own compost. And then I'm usually growing in my beds for a long time up until winter, so to get that chop and drop crop, I'd have to give up some growing time because it just gets too cold. If I were going to pick something, I definitely like peas. You can get peas really cheaply, use them as a cover crop, or a clover. I like that. But most of my organic matter comes from my garden. I also I'm just thinking too. I also do a lot of no dig now that my beds are set up. So I leave all the root systems in there. So I'm just thinking out loud. So putting in like clover and getting a nice root system in there, and the clover can take nitrogen from the atmosphere. You don't want to necessarily turn it over, but if you can just cut it down and just let it die off, that's usually a good way to do it too, is try and keep the roots in throughout your soil. But I don't do it too often. I just don't need it. On a bigger scale, if I had a bigger farm and I was rotating crops, I would definitely do it. You just want to make sure you're getting annual rye or annual grasses, anything that's not going to be a perennial. People have made mistakes and they've bought thinking they're buying cover crops and they're perennial root systems, and then they get them through the garden and it's really hard to get rid of them. Favorite seeds to grow? I love growing tomato plants. I don't have any specific varieties that I like, but I just like growing. So I like seeing the garden now is fading out, because of winter, and then I just love watching all the green growth grow. Bruce, I'm glad that worked. And I just did a video on that. Wood pellets and alfalfa pellets, made the compost in my tumbler. I have all of that too, because that turned out really, really well. Any last questions before we wrap up? And again, I'll be back on, I can tell you actually, on 12/28 at 11 a.m. We'll do garden grounds for the fourth Thursday of this month. And if you're interested in this format, perk memberships, I do this 4 or 5 times a month, and it's a smaller group, so I really have time that I can answer everybody's question. I used to just do this for 30 minutes, but I felt it was too short, and people would sign on sometimes at 11:30, so now I do this an hour. And if I forget to turn the sound back on, I do it for an hour and 10 minutes. Yeah, on my Instagram, thank you, Stacy. I can remember that day just like it was yesterday, really. So for people that didn't see my Instagram, it's just a plaid jacket, and it was at my parents'. Oh, it was at my house where I grew, and it was my first garden was there or whatever. But it was just a kind of throwback. Like, I wear plaid all the time. I don't have it on today, but plaid pattern flannel shirts. It's been with me since I was 20 years old. How to keep a grow rack warmer? Well, you can use a heat mat, which I only use for peppers. You can, if it's a metal rack, you can set your flats on cardboard and helps insulate them from the cold metal that draws heat away. But there's no real other way to keep it warmer. The lights closely should keep that space warm enough for you to use. Thank you, Grow Big, for the book shout out. I do, and if you guys, my new book is out too. I might also use this. Growing an Edible Landscape. I co-authored this with my friend Kiara. It's out now. You can get it anywhere. And it really helps it teaches you about vegetable gardening. My first book, here it is. My first book, Modern Homestead Garden, is all about creating that homestead garden, and it's in-depth about the vegetable garden. The Edible Landscape talks about vegetable gardening, but also about how to transform your whole space into an edible landscape, and just ways that you can do that and expand your food footprint, on your property. And edible also refers to us, but also to nature, insects and pollinators and stuff like that. The one and only, every time purple top turnips, I'm assuming, my seeds get lost and nothing grows. I don't know, and I don't know why that's happening. And that's, maybe we'll kind of end on these last couple of questions, is trying to kind of problem solve. Like, are you getting too much rain? Or the soil too loose? Is it getting washed down? Are the seeds even germinating? You could have a bad batch of seeds and they're not germinating. Purple top should germinate within 5 to 7 days, and I've never had trouble with them. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, but I would try and problem solve around, are the seeds viable? What's going on with this space? And do they always fail? If they're failing in one space over and over again, it could be the space. If you're putting them in different places in your garden, you have to be like, what's going on with these seeds? But I don't think you need to do anything special. Japanese beetles, no. I mean, you have to trap them or put dust down to kill them off. Japanese beetle traps do work. If you want to spend the money, you can get milky spore, white powder. You spread it on your lawn, and over time, years, it multiplies and it will take care of the Japanese beetle larvae. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent not for lawns, because lawns don't feed anything. They don't do anything for good insects, but they're a great place for Japanese beetle larvae just to sit and multiply in your lawn. Thank you guys very much for the book support. I really, really appreciate it. All right, I think we're going to wrap up here. Thanks so much. Enjoy your Thursday, and I will be back for the public Thursday, Garden Grounds, 11 a.m. on 12/28. You guys take care.